Hello, 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 and welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Conversational Witchcraft with me, Dawn the Kitchen Witch. Before we get going, I always have to remind you, subscribe to this channel, click the buttons, like and share, hit the bell if you're watching this on YouTube so you know when we post more content. And if you love, love, love what we're doing, please go and click the support us button. You can help us bring you more great information, inspiration, magic, and conversations by just clicking support. But you can buy me a cup of coffee. You know how much I love my coffee. So click to support if you like what we're doing. We really, really appreciate it and want to keep doing this show. Don't forget to learn more about me and food magic and kitchen witchcraft. You can follow me at all socials at Cucina Aurora, or visit me online at cucinaaurora.com and take a look at some of my kitchen witchcraft books and recipes and all that kind of good stuff. So today we have a very special guest. It is Kris Spisak, a graduate of the College of William and Mary and the University of Richmond. She wrote her first 3 books, Get a Grip on Your Grammar, the Novel Editing Workshop, and the Family Story Workbook, to help writers of all kinds sharpen their storytelling and empower their communications. Her award-winning debut novel, The Baba Yaga Mask, has been called a complex poetic tale and edutainment at its best by the Historical Novel Society. Her 5th book, Becoming Baba Yaga, Trickster, Feminist, and Witch of the Woods, has been described as a delicious read by Atlas Obscura and a nuanced work of feminist literary criticism by Foreword Reviews. I'm really excited to have you here, Kris.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a pretty impressive resume.
Thank you. I've been having some fun.
Right? Right. And at first I was like, oh, she's going to be a little stuffy because she wrote all these books about grammar. And then I met you and I'm like, she's so cool.
Well, yeah, that should be on my resume also. No, the whole reason I have been obsessed with storytelling and communications and how we use our language is because so often when people want to have those conversations, you have these flashbacks to your worst possible English teacher in school, or you have these flashbacks of someone correcting your grammar on social media.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about.
Yeah.
Storytelling is a human superpower. Let's use our words, and this is where we make the magic happen. And I guess that's where it all ties in here, right?
I love that. I love that because it's true that our words are how we tell stories. And, as human beings, history as a witchcraft, all of this has been told through storytelling. 50 years ago, there weren't books. Well, there probably were, but there weren't as many books as like, okay, A plus B equals C. And that's how you do this spellcraft, right? It
Right.
was, oh, my grandma taught me that if you stir clockwise, and this one time she did that, and it's all in the storytelling. That's a heritage.
Exactly.
That's life, right? So is that how you got started writing stories? You've just always loved to tell
Yes.
stories?
Yes, I've loved telling stories my whole life. I think I am a writer because I would be a pathological liar if I wasn't. But I write, so we're cool. I get it. I channel it out. I write fiction and nonfiction, so
Yeah.
I can play with both sides of the coin, right?
Yeah.
No, but to answer your question, I grew up being surrounded by amazing storytellers. I am first generation American, and on my mother's side, and I grew up in a household that was Ukrainian and spoke Ukrainian and you
Mm.
did Ukrainian dancing and learned Ukrainian embroidery and folk tales and artistry and
Wow.
dance and all of this. And that was such a big piece of my childhood. And in addition to all of that, I heard the stories of my family's stories in Ukraine, especially my grandparents' stories of World War II
Yeah.
and survival
Yeah.
and belief and loyalty to one's family and strength in oneself. And I think those stories shaped me so much.
Yeah.
And then I started growing up and I was learning that when I said I was Ukrainian, people were, what? What's that? I
Where is
realized
that? I was
last,
going to get a globe. We
exactly,
don't know where that is.
exactly now the world knows where Ukraine is on a map. But when I
Right.
was a kid, no one really did. And so I started telling stories and I'm like, but what about this? And what about this tradition? And yes, you might do Easter eggs one way in Easter, but the way we do Easter eggs is actually with fire and wax. And that's how I do my art projects. And it was
Wow.
just this whole idea of how could my culture and the stories of my culture shape who I am, and how can I tell the world about it? Especially a
Wow.
world who at the time didn't know where Ukraine was on a map.
Right.
So I heard the positive stories and then the negative stories and the survival stories. And that shaped who I am as a storyteller, but also the stories that I knew I needed to tell.
That's really incredible. So were you always like, you're a kid growing up in a first generation household, Ukrainian immigrants, right? So I think, my grandmother on my mother's side was born in Italy. My mother was first generation. That makes me second generation. So our culture of Italian was much more Italian American, right? Like
Yes.
my grandmother's parents, my great grandparents who, came here with her when she was a little girl, that was like Italian, Italian. But by the time it got to me, it was the 80s and it was Italian American and
Right.
it was a little diluted, right? We didn't
Right.
speak the language, we didn't have any of that stuff. As I look back now, I see that there was oh, look, these are quintessential Italian things, which we didn't realize because we were surrounded by
Yes.
other Italians in New York. So
Exactly.
we didn't know there was a difference, like all this, see all this hand movement I'm doing with, we just
Right.
thought everybody talked like this.
Right.
Right. But so you were growing up steeped in this culture. And then you go to school and you're a little kid and everybody's like, well, you do Easter eggs with wax. That's so weird. But you had this real sense of self and culture. Were you always into telling stories, writing stories as a child? And were they fantasy stories or were you repeating stories that you had heard?
Oh, it's such a good question. So when I was a kid, I was doing a lot of repeating of the stories. And I think one of my earliest stories that I was just so fascinated by and I wanted to hear more about, I think I was probably 8 years old. And I was at a dinner party with my grandparents. My grandparents had this giant circle of Ukrainian friends. And now, in most of my life, maybe 11 months out of the year, I was a typical American kid.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's side is the Ukrainian side of my family. And so, but 1 month out of the year, every year, I went to live with my grandparents and my mom. And just like there was this kind of 1 month of summer vacation that was like Ukrainian immersion. And myself, my brother, my siblings, we were all, excuse me, my cousins, like we were all around in this very connected Ukrainian community for about 1 month out of the summer every year. And my grandparents would always, they were big hosts. They would always throw these extravagant dinner parties with
Yeah.
like half the neighborhood would be there. And of course, they made the little children like sing Ukrainian folk songs, and all of the older folks would be just so amused by the little children who were doing dancing and singing and all of this type stuff. And I'm never been someone who's been shy about being on stage. So I was all about all of this. But I remember there was one dinner party in particular, and this is going to date me a little bit, but I had a tape recorder with those
Mm.
tiny cassette tapes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Oh,
I
yeah.
had this tape recorder, and the grown-ups started talking about witches. And this is a community where everyone was deeply, deeply Ukrainian Catholic, which is different from Roman Catholic, but that's a different conversation. So everyone is deeply, deeply Ukrainian Catholic, going to Mass every single Sunday, but also having this deep belief in witches and certain elements of folk tales of Eastern Europe that were lingering amid a deep belief in Christianity. And this blew my 8 year old mind. I
Right.
didn't get it. So I remember there was one dinner party and I was maybe 8, 9 years old. I got my little tape recorder and I put it on my lap and I put my napkin on my lap because I was a polite little kid. But of course, napkin on my lap covered my tape recorder.
Right.
And all of a sudden
But you
I
can't
started
let people know that you're doing this.
no,
No,
no. My
no.
brother was the only one I who knew, and he kept just looking at me askance of like, "What are you doing?" But I was investigating, man. I mean, this was like the beginning of it all.
Right.
So I covered up, and then I just started asking questions and like directing, like, "Well, you said this. What do you mean by this? But wait a second, you're talking about this. What do you mean by this?" And then they would just start going with like the threads that I would give them, and then just have all of these conversations that I was just utterly fascinated by. So you take the moments like that, and then moments where I was a little kid in history class in elementary school and junior high and high school, where I was hearing World War II stories in Eastern Europe geography classes, where I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
where's my family's version of this story? I'm not hearing
Oh,
anybody talk about this moment, especially
yeah.
my family from Western Ukraine in World War II, where you have Nazi Germany on one side and Russia on the other side, and you have these 2 weeks in 1941, 2 weeks where Ukraine was an independent country, 2 weeks. And I know this story really well. I grew up with the story, but the world didn't know this story.
Right.
So take all of these factors and then my storytelling nature, and I have things to say.
Right. Right. Because you want people to know
Exactly.
and you want to have your family's story told because you're like,
Exactly.
how come nobody is talking about this?
Exactly. So
I,
my last book, my novel, it's fiction and it plays with those events. It's not my family story by any means, but the events that happen to my characters are a timeline that is incredibly familiar to me.
and that book you're talking about, your fiction book, is the Baba Yaga Mask.
Yes, it's called the
Yeah.
Baba Yaga Mask because who doesn't need a grandmother who is obsessed with folktales?
I mean, right? That's freaking brilliant. So I want to go back because I'm intrigued because I feel like I don't know, there's a little bit of meat on that bone. You're this little kid and you're sitting there with your little tape recorder and your curious little mind. I'm asking this because I did similar things. Did you then take that little tape recorder and listen to it over and over again and then start
Absolutely.
working out your own story?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think later when I started learning more like complex terms about like the dichotomy of the religious experience and all of this stuff, when I was much later on, I'm like, oh, okay, yes, that's what that was. But it's just very funny. But as a kid, I had that tape recorder and I listened to it again and again and again, trying to figure out what piece did I miss, what threads, like what are my follow-up questions? I mean,
Right.
little journalist at
Like
heart here.
investigative.
Exactly.
Investigative journalism at 8
I
years
know.
old. I mean, that's something. That's really, I was like a playwright. I would go and I would watch my favorite musical theater like movies like Grease or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
I would on my VHS. Do people even
Of
out there
course.
even know what VHS is anymore? And I would play, pause, and then I would write it down. And then I would play, pause, and write it down. And then I would type the whole thing up and I would and I would make my mother make like 87 copies and I would give them out to the kids in the neighborhood and we would have to put that play on in the backyard.
I love that so much.
Right.
You're
Like that
a soul after my own heart.
organizational thinking. And like you said, like the tape recording and like, what can I do with this? How can I
Mm-hmm.
create something out of this? Right. Like,
Exactly.
were you always this kind of a creative person?
I think so. And I think it's morphed in different eras of my life. In middle school and high school, I was a poet, and my first publications were
Mm,
in poetry. And honestly, my first publication was a poem about um, my name and about Kris, which Americanized, you can say Christy, Ukrainian, you'd say Kristunya, and about how Kris can be this name that can be American or not American and kind of play with his different versions, and about who I would be and the vodka I would drink. And it was hilarious looking back because I was like this soul who probably may or may not have even had vodka at that point in my life when I was writing this poem, but it spoke to my Slavic core.
right.
But
That's
it's very funny.
amazing.
Creativity touches us at different moments of our lives in different ways. And I think I've always been one who's wanted to lean into that. And to anybody listening who feels like you have something to say, it doesn't matter if you want to claim the title writer or not. People get so nervous around that term. But no,
Yeah.
like we are human. We have things to say. You want to write a poem, write a poem. You want to write a play, write a book, write a blog, write a really fierce post on social media,
Right.
you know?
I'm kind of fascinated by this conversation because this isn't generally how conversation like I often no really like most of my guests are like witchy witches and
Yes,
we're
yes, yes.
right and we're talking about their journey into witchcraft. There's been a handful of times where I've had people on the show where I've talked about their journey into their career and entrepreneurship. And that's kind of what this is. And I'm fascinated by the fact that your entire journey is around storytelling and writing and communicating because it is so important. And I don't think people, like you, to your point, they don't like that word writer. Okay. I have a bunch of published works. I don't consider myself a writer.
Oh, but you are.
I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. Like I'm a writer. Right. I was terrible in school. I have all kinds of learning disabilities. I struggle with spelling and grammar. I should probably get your grammar book. It's just a plug for you and your grammar book. But I would never, I wouldn't have dreamed of myself as a child being a quote unquote writer, even though I was that kid who did like screenplays and I took creative writing classes. And I completely forgot until you mentioned it that like the first thing I ever published was a poem in the eighth grade in the poetry, like the poetry club. I was all into that.
You're a writer.
And I completely forgot until you mentioned it. I was like, oh my God, you did that too. Like, what advice do you have for somebody out there who might be sitting here and going, well, I have ideas and I have something to say, but I don't have the skill set or the education to be a writer?
It doesn't matter. So often people have this idea that being a writer is this grandiose thing, that someone is born with this gift. No, we're surrounded by words every day. Every single one of us has the skill set. So it's a matter of, if you have something to say it. Is it going to be the greatest work of literary masterpiece, whatever it is, the first time you write something down? No, but every great writer in history had to practice. That's the little known secret that people don't want to say. And for me to switch this perhaps more towards where your conversations go, this is my daily practice.
Yes.
Finding the magic within your words.
Yes.
And finding the magic in stories that have existed for centuries, if not millennia, because the stories that have existed for that long have stuck around for a reason. And
Absolutely.
this is where my obsession with Baba Yaga began, because my daily practice really is thinking about language and story empowerment. And I am obsessed with this old Slavic witch, Baba Yaga, and how she can empower our modern lives.
Okay, so having that been said, I want to stop. I want to put a pin in it. Let's hear from our sponsors so that we can get back to this and talk about your new book without interruption. So we'll be right back with Kris Spisak right after the break. We're back with Kris Spisak. I'm really excited to talk to you about your new book, which is Becoming Baba Yaga. Let's do the whole thing. Becoming Baba Yaga, Trickster, Feminist, Witch of the Woods. So I had said before we hit the record button, I know like a tiny little bit about Baba Yaga. Like I know who she is. I know about her little hut and the chicken feet. I kind of want to crawl into that hut and just like hide from the world. Also, at the same time, I might be her because I'm a kitchen witch and I'm always cooking something and everybody's welcome, but don't piss me off. Like, so,
you get the vibe.
Yeah. So I kind of know her, but I also kind of am her from what I know. So you had said right before the break that you have this fascination with Baba Yaga because of this storytelling and the lore, right? Especially with your heritage. So let's talk about that. How did you, for lack of a better term, meet Baba Yaga in your life?
That's exactly the correct term to use. So I have known Baba Yaga as a character for decades, since as far back as I remember Baba Yaga stories. And it was when I was actually working on my novel, The Baba Yaga Mask, which is dual timeline fiction going back and forth between the present day and World War II Ukraine. And I was trying to find a literary device, if you will, to tie together my two stories that I wanted to tell and leaning into my roots and my Ukrainian stories and all of this stuff. And I had the idea, I'm like, I am obsessed with folktales. The world is often obsessed with folktales. Let me just play a little bit with Baba Yaga, because she's this fascinating character who sometimes is described as an evil witch. She appears in pop culture all over the place lately. My personal love-hate relationship is with the John Wick series, where Keanu Reeves has a code name, Baba Yaga, and then the subtitles say Boogeyman. And anybody who knows anything about Baba Yaga is like shaking their fist at their screen every single time. Like, she is not a boogeyman. Why is this the translation? But anyway, she's such a complex character where sometimes people portray her as purely evil. Sometimes people portray her in this trickster light. And other times, and my favorite times, are the many, many stories that go back centuries, if not millennia, of how she is a being who is fierce, but if you prove yourself to her, she can make your wildest dreams come true. So she's not a fairy godmother. She is like this dark twist on a fairy godmother, but you've got to earn it. It's not about Cinderella crying under the willow tree. You've got to prove yourself. And this concept returned me to Baba Yaga and my study of her in a way that has not stopped. And I'm not sure it's going to anytime soon, because in so many of her stories, whether it's a prince named Ivan, because there's always a prince named Ivan in those tales, or it's a girl named Vasilisa or Natasha, or so many of these names. These characters come to her, and she almost always asks this one question. And her question is, are you here to do deeds, or are you here to run from them? And this question just fascinates me.
Yeah.
What if, whether we're meeting a witch in the woods or not, we wake up every single morning and you ask yourself, today, am I going to do deeds, or am I going to run from them?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you don't have to be this childish fairy tale character to have your entire perspective on your entire day flipped, whether you're a go-getter and taking off your task list, or having that moment of, what is it that I'm running from that I kind of need to face?
Well, I mean, these characters, these energetic beings, these goddesses, these spirits, however you choose to see them, are around for a reason. People work with the energy of Baba Yaga because of all these different faces and phases, and what kind of energy do I need? And can I look to her as allegory for my life? What lessons can I learn from her stories or from her example for my life? Right.
And I love that you said goddesses, because when you start tracing back the breadcrumbs of who she is today, who she was 100 years ago, who she was when she first entered the written word, you suddenly start hearing this more complex version of who she is and has been. And there's all of these goddesses of thousands of years that have amalgamated together into the story. The first version of her name used in print was in a grammar book. Actually, we have a deep tie in a book called The Russian Grammar. It was written in 1751. It's the first usage of Baba Yaga in world writing.
Wow.
Written in 1751. It's a book called The Russian Grammar. It's not about apostrophes and semicolons, I promise you. It was grammar as in the sense of grammar school. This is kind of an elementary level tome about just learning broadly. And in this book, there was a table of gods and goddesses of the world. So different belief systems compared. So you had Norse mythology and Greek mythology and Roman mythology and just all of these world mythologies. It was 1751, so I'm sure it was not that diverse in its representation, but whatever.
Right.
But anyway, so they had all of these Slavic gods and goddesses, and amid all of the Slavic goddesses, where you so you had Perun next to Jupiter and next to Odin, like all of this. But then there on the table sat Baba Yaga, and she did not have a comparable goddess in any other world mythology in this book. She was on a line all by herself. And notice, she's not a witch in this story. She is being called a goddess in her first known written form. So
I mean, that's amazing, right?
And I had another book to write.
Right. So, Baba Yaga has so many different iterations, right? So many different ways of interpreting her history, who she's been, who she represents throughout time. Which one speaks to you the most, and why?
So, this is such a great question. Like, every chapter of my book actually analyzes different aspects of her personality.
Right. Exactly. So you've put that all together. There's got to be something
absolutely
that pulls to you individually.
Three. Darn it. That's such a hard question. Okay. So one, she has such a deep respect for kind of the natural world and all of the creatures and plants and everything that exists within it,
Yeah.
that I feel like in the modern day, it is so essential for us to listen to and think about how the animals and the herbs and
Mm.
the people are all equal parts of her stories. She is not better than any of these, and she ensures anybody she interacts with does not act as if they are better than, I mean, I'm not even going to say the natural world, than the gates on her fence, showing a level of deep respect for all that exists around you is such an important point that I think we all need to remember in our modern world that can be so very complex. Now, of course, Baba Yaga and her ferocity as almost a mother also speaks deeply to me. And I don't say mother necessarily as one who has given birth, but I mean mother as in one who empowers the next generation. So maybe I should phrase it that way.
Yeah.
Because along with Baba Yaga's question that comes up again and again about are you doing deeds or are you running from them? In so many of her stories, which when you trace back the roots of her stories to the goddesses who make him have come before, who inspire these stories, which I
Yeah.
100% believe that these roots are coming
Yeah.
from a deity. So many of these characters have kind of four traits. And if you can connect and kind of pass Baba Yaga's test, if you will, with these four traits, then what you want in your life is entirely possible. And who among us does not want to be told whatever it is,
Right.
whatever you want in your life, it can be possible if you can pass Baba Yaga's tests. And yes, her tests involve outlandish pieces because this is folklore after all. But there's a consistency that if you approach Baba Yaga with respect, so, okay, there's lesson number one,
Mm.
respect. So if someone looks different from you, if someone acts different from you, if someone lives in a different way than you, if you're still approaching that person with respect, you pass number one. Number two, and I spoke to this already, if you have a kind heart, so if you're being kind to the animals and to nature and her gate that is squeaky in its hinges and all of these different pieces and show that consistently while she's with you, that's number two. Three, bravery. Are you brave enough to go after what you want? This is not a fairy godmother who will grant you all the things.
Right.
You've got to get after it.
Yeah.
You've got to show that you are brave enough
Yeah.
to go after what you're looking for. So again, it's like it's the kindness, it's the respect, it's the bravery, and it's the intelligence. And I'm not going to say intelligence as in you got all your A's in school. Someone that you are going to pause and you're going to assess your situation and you're going to look around and you're going to see if you can do some problem solving. That's all I mean by intelligence in there. And I think that's a lesson for all of us in the modern
Yeah.
day, that if you think about a witch or a goddess, someone who you can think on a daily measure, if today, at the end of the day, when I'm going to bed, as I'm going to sleep, would I pass Baba Yaga's test today? Was I
Right.
a good person? Was I respectful? Was I kind? Was I brave? Was I clever? It gives you a different perspective. And I think I find myself doing that when I wake up in the morning. I ask myself about what I'm running from or what deeds I'm going to do. And when I'm going to bed, I'm thinking, did I pass Baba Yaga's test?
Yeah.
And whether you see her as a story or a being or a presence or however you want to look at her, she can redefine your perspective on life and your possibility.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And that's, goddesses, entities, spirits, when we work with them as magical practitioners, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to inspire and guide, not just, at least in my experience. I
Right.
don't want something given to me easily. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, luck is great, but luck comes from trying and trying and trying and hard work. And
Right.
to have, to give you direction, right? If I can sit down and I can say, did I pass Baba Yaga's test today? It gives me scope and direction in how to proceed in my life in all ways, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, right? Was I brave? Was I kind? Was I respectful? Was I clever? Did I have something I needed to be clever about today? No, today was an easy day. I didn't have to figure anything out. Great.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, maybe I'm going to have a flat tire and I'm going to have to figure out how to get out of this ditch in the snow. I don't know. The answer to that question is, do I go to pieces in that moment? Or do I take a breath and go, no, I am clever. I can pass Baba Yaga. This is a test. I can
Yeah,
pass this test because I can figure this out because I am all of these things. It gives us compass and direction, which I think is
exactly.
probably why she's seen as a goddess, because she gives us insight into ourselves, our daily lives, and how we, move through the world, right?
Exactly. She's almost a mindfulness coach if you really want to
Right.
push it a little bit. Because I mean, if she made poor Vasilisa in the one of her most famous tales is Vasilisa the Beautiful, and she was part of Vasilisa's just seeing how she dealt with the situation. She took a giant bag of poppy seeds. So imagine a poppy seed, little black dot, and poured it into her black garden soil and said, Vasilisa, separate the soil from the poppy seeds. So the test is not whether she could do it. The test was how is she handling this situation? So going back to your point, if you get a flat tire, if you drop a dish full of something that goes all over your kitchen, is Baba Yaga there like cackling? Maybe, maybe not. But you can take that moment and be like, okay, that happened. How am I going to deal with this situation?
Right. That
And it's
sucks.
perspective. Yeah,
Move
exactly.
on.
It's like, well, that is not how I wanted that to go. But here I am. I'm standing on the edge of a garden and there's a pound of poppy seeds in the garden that I need to
Right.
do. All right, let's get to work.
Right.
And we all have so much power and ability inside of ourselves and we forget it all the time. So Baba Yaga reminds us of our strength and our own ability to decide what we want to do with our everyday because we have that power.
So that brings me to my next question. Specifically, right now, in the time we live in the world we live in, why is this book and Baba Yaga so important, especially for women right now?
Ugh. So as I said, Baba Yaga, she's popping up all over the place right now. For those of you who are fiction readers who are listening, there was a great book called Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott, who uses Baba Yaga in her fiction. And Jenna Rose Nethercott wrote the foreword for my book, Becoming Baba Yaga. And in that foreword, she called Baba Yaga the it girl of the moment, which personally I love because you think of like some Hollywood starlet or something, but no, it's Baba Yaga. She's the it girl of this
Right.
moment. Okay, so why is she the it girl of this moment? I love it and I completely agree with it. We're living in scary times.
Mm.
We're living in a moment that honestly it's horrifying. You look outside, you watch the news. Goodness, good
Don't
luck to you
watch the
if you
news.
do. Don't watch the
Don't
news.
watch the
Yeah.
news. Don't watch it. Don't watch it.
You get online, you hear about different things. The human brain was not created to take in all of the fear and negative stimulus we get on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis.
Amen.
So Baba Yaga is having this resurgence right now, which I adore, not just because of my Ukrainian roots, but in a moment where everything looks horrific and terrifying. She is our reminder that in the darkness, amid the scariest things of the fear of Baba Yaga might eat you, she is our reminder that in the darkness, if we are our best selves, we can still not only succeed, but we can prosper amid the darkness, even when darkness is all around us and we are terrified. And I think, especially for women, the world is
Mm-hmm.
scary for all of us. And we're living through what a moment in history we are living through. And there are so many things that I could say and I won't. That's a different conversation. I'll have that conversation, but that's a different conversation.
But you're right. You're right. And specifically as women, women tend to look through and for other women for support, for guidance, for um, community, right? And we do have a tendency to look at our elders and our wise women and learn from them. And in a moment where women specifically, as well as other minority groups, feel and are being attacked in such a way, a
Mhm.
strong figure like Baba Yaga gives us hope, encouragement, right? Strength.
Absolutely. And a lack of fear about wrinkles that appear, a lack of fear about white hair, a lack of hesitation to say no. The power of no, as we all know, is so
Yes.
powerful. And she's like, well, no, there's no hesitation. She knows who she is, and she's going to say yes or no or make her plans accordingly. She's not afraid of the no. She's not afraid of who anybody or what anybody thinks of her. She's going to live her life her way and whatever to anybody else says. And that's a beautiful reminder for us all.
Oh God, yeah. It's funny because for those of you who are listening and not watching, this is the first. So I finished recording my last season of this show in November, right before my birthday. And I decided on my birthday, I was no longer going to color my hair. I am 45 years old. I am leaning into my gray hair witch era. I am like, screw this. I don't give a shit about people because people say, because I do a lot of cooking videos and people will be like, your hair looks gross. And I'm like, screw you. So I have decided I am coming into that phase of my life where I don't care about the gray hair and the wrinkles and the age. And I'm embracing it. And I do think that especially women of my age and generation we're all at that same place. And one of the reasons we are resonating with Baba Yaga so fiercely. So yeah, so I'm really glad that you mentioned that about like Baba Yaga getting into like not giving a shit about gray hair and whatever. Is I just decided on my birthday in November that this is the first time I'm not dyeing my hair since I was like in my 20s. And I'm letting all this gray hair come in. And this is the first time I'm recording and I can see the video of myself with the gray hair. And I'm like, hell yeah. Like I am leaning into it. And one of the things I wanted to say was that I think there's a lot of women of my age of my generation at this point, we're a little bit fed up. And one of the reasons we are resonating with Baba Yaga's message so much is because of where we are in our lives. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We do not, like, we're in that moment where we are being bombarded with conversations of Botox and face yoga and all of these different things. And you know what? Everyone should do what makes them comfortable. So this is not a judgment conversation, but just because there is an old fashioned vision of beauty, it's like there's some beauty in the ferocity of a woman who knows herself and owns herself and doesn't stand up for anybody's version of beauty except for knowing herself and her core. I mean, what's more beautiful than someone who is living her life?
And the realness of that. Mm-hmm. Right. And the realness of Baba Yaga, I think, is another something that resonates with women. I'm not saying that men don't resonate with her energy as well, but I think I can only speak from my own perspective. And I'm a 45-year-old, Italian meatball from New York. So that's my perspective. And I think we resonate with the realness of her. The Absolutely. Idea of, no, at this point in my life, you don't have access to me unless you prove yourself to me. No, I'm not going to just do things or be who you think I should be. I'm not a people pleaser anymore. I'm beyond that phase of my life. And I am in this phase of my life where no, I will love you and I will care for you and I'll give you everything I possibly can if I deem you worthy of my energy and time.
Right. And going back to what you said about one detail that a lot of people know about Baba Yaga, and for listeners and watchers who are not familiar, this is the one piece that you need to know from Baba Yaga. So she lives in a house deep in the woods, and this house stands upon chicken legs, right? So if someone comes to her and she doesn't want them there, the house can stand up and turn itself around so that no one can find the front door. And if that person is really persistent, and the house can just stand up and walk itself away to somewhere where they can have a little bit more privacy. And in this moment of so many of our lives, who doesn't kind of want that chicken-legged house? I mean, Seriously. Really, I kind of want that house. And you could also argue that she's a tiny house enthusiast before it was even cool.
Before it was a thing.
I know.
Before it was a thing. I love it. So here's another question. In your extensive research of Baba Yaga and her history and all of that, is there something that in you learning about her and creating this relationship with her that surprised you or What would surprise us about her?
So when you start digging down the trail of stories of how how Baba Yaga became Baba Yaga, hence the title of the book, you find this trail of stories of historical figures, of Peter the Great's half sister, and Saint Olga of Kiev, and goddesses that trace back hundreds, if not thousands, of years. The oldest the oldest data I found about possible linkages with Baba Yaga were from 7,000 years ago.
Whoa.
So just ponder that for a moment. I mean, this is where if you didn't know that I
Wow.
love research and like can get into nitty gritty, yes, it's grammar, but also it's just diving into
Yeah.
historical records of how many different languages and cultures and all across Eastern Europe, whether we're talking about Russia or Ukraine or Poland or anywhere. There's so many different records. And there is a society that was prospering about 5,000 years before the Common Era. So about 7,000 years ago, and they had a female goddess that they revered. And there are artifacts of pottery because this culture called Tripolia, they're little known because they had a kind of a burning ritual where when they moved from place to place, they burned down their villages. So you didn't have monuments and architecture and all of this history about where they were. So people are discovering them in the past 100 years, but they're not always in a lot of history books yet, but they're starting to be. But they
Wow.
had pottery that was more advanced than what they were making in ancient Egypt at the time. And they
Wow.
have female figurines that seem to be of a goddess. And sometimes this goddess has this kind of partner of a bird, or maybe sometimes the goddess is a bird with this beak type thing. And you're realizing this connection between Baba Yaga's long nose and this beaked bird of 7,000 years ago, and this reverence of this goddess who is there to inspire not only women in childbirth who are bringing souls into the light, into the world, but also all of these different aspects of Baba Yaga as a midwife taking a soul from one place to the other, whether it was from like the moment of birth or the moment of death and
Right.
passing, whether it's something where people were honoring her for how she could help their lives. But there are all these little aspects of her for thousands of years. And there are too many breadcrumbs in
Mm.
all of these little historical tidbits for you to deny that there's a connection. Is it a complete, this goddess of 7,000 years ago became Baba Yaga? No, but she's one of the puzzle pieces. I have zero doubt that she is one of the many puzzle pieces. So that
Amazing.
historical examination is also a part of the book.
Amazing. Um, on a personal level, how has your relationship with Baba Yaga impacted your life and your relationships?
I feel like that deep respect for all those and all things around me. I feel like I've tried my best, and all of us try our best to be our best selves. But I feel like through the lens of Baba Yaga, something that may have caught me off guard at a different moment in my life, you know what, you be you. Like you, whether it is something strange in the woods of a tree trunk that is just gnarled and shaped in this strange, absurd way, that I think I'm finding more beauty in the natural world
Mm.
because of my appreciation for the world that is around me. And that is the natural world, but that could be me walking down the sidewalk. I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm noticing a crack in the sidewalk, and something is happening with that crack that is completely absurd, that it's tying into a mural and all of these different pieces. And I'm wowed and astounded. And I think I am allowing more awe in my life
Mm.
because of my study of Baba Yaga.
What a great tribute to her and a great influence from this entity
Mm-hmm.
who is asking us to be aware,
Right.
respectful, kind. All of that starts with let me look outside of myself,
Right.
right? That's really, really beautiful. Kris, is there something, if you were sitting in my shoes, what would you be asking yourself that I might have missed?
I think I am someone who's always obsessed with world stories. I started to say this earlier, but this whole concept of the stories that stick in
Mm.
the zeitgeist have lessons and secrets hiding within them.
Mm.
So for me, Baba Yaga is a big one, but there are a number of others that I feel like they are just primed for deep exploration, not only from a historical lens, but as a lens of examining humanity and who we are and who we have been. Because I think the stories we tell share so much about who we are
Right.
in the past and the present and who we can be in the future. And I don't say this related to any sort of political agenda, but pay attention to the stories that you are told, who the
Mm-hmm.
teller is, what their intended goal is for the story, because Baba Yaga has been manipulated in all sorts of different ways, that she has been a tool for propaganda in certain eras of
Yeah.
her storytelling life of be good little children or else Baba Yaga will eat you. But you know what? Every single version of herself has shaped her into who she is. And I think that speaks to us too, that you know what? She had a bad phase there. She had a propaganda.
Yeah.
But you know what? Who among us hasn't had an era in our life we would have maybe made some different choices in? Those could be big
Absolutely.
choices or little choices. And you know what? Baba Yaga's been there too. And that's okay. She's still a powerhouse.
Absolutely. And I think your point about stories is really important. And going back to the beginning of our conversation about really being a storyteller and loving stories and learning from stories,
Mhm.
that is how human beings have learned from each other and culture has been passed down, and recipes have been passed, as we were talking about in the beginning. But there are stories, we can caution, right?
Yes.
There are stories that are fiction that are meant to give us entertainment, joy, insight, that are allegory for life so we can learn from them and apply them to our lives, whether they are popular stories like right now. Well, we're all
Mhm.
obsessed with Wicked, the movie musical, because it was so effing fantastic. But again, it's allegory. It's about someone who is powerful and scary and she becomes a scapegoat and all of that. If you haven't seen Wicked, go see Wicked.
Go see Wicked.
Go see Wicked. Just see it. So that's a good example of that. But it's being presented as this is a fictitious story that is meant to make you feel or enjoy or think. And then there are other stories that are being presented as fact,
Right.
and they're not fact.
Right.
They're not true, right? There's facts and then there are stories.
Right.
And it is unfortunate because in this day and age, those things are getting confused. So we have to be really going back to Baba Yaga's lessons. We have to be very, very aware. We have to approach with respect and kindness. We have to be clever so we can figure out, is this true or is it a lie? And then we have to be brave to say, I don't believe that. That's a lie.
Yeah.
Right. So it all ties together and it all works. It's just pretty incredible. Kris, this is very enjoyable. I'm very excited. I am not a big fiction reader, but as soon as we're done, I'm literally going to go online and buy the Baba Yaga Mask. I'm going to buy that
Oh,
and I'm going to read it because I'm intrigued. And I want to hear your stories. Knowing that those are your stories that are inspired by your family and your Ukrainian heritage, like really want to learn about that.
thank you so much. And just if I may, the Baba Yaga Mask, I said it's dual timeline fiction. And it really is the story of a Ukrainian grandmother who
Yeah.
wants to see Ukrainian dancing on soil where it makes sense before she dies. She books a flight to Europe, goes to Europe, lands, steps off the plane, and disappears. And it is the story of her two goddaughters, who are, I think, our age here. And they are on this wild goose chase across multiple countries in Europe, trying to find out what happened to their grandmother, who's 90 something years old. Did something happen to her? Is she okay? Or is she up to something? This woman who has been obsessed with Baba Yaga her entire life. This is not a giveaway of anything about the book. She might be up to something. And it's going back and forth between her as a grandmother and her as a 15-year-old in 1941 Ukraine
Oh my,
as war is on her doorstep. And I
amazing.
had so much joy writing that book. And my nonfiction, Becoming Baba Yaga,
Yes.
not only is it the nonfiction unraveling how understanding Baba Yaga has become Baba Yaga and how Baba Yaga can help you become a better version of yourself, between every chapter is also a retelling of her classic folk tales. So if you're unfamiliar,
Oh,
between
yes.
every chapter, you get a retelling. And yes, it is a retelling from my lens. I get to be the one who does it. But when it comes to world storytelling, it's a massive game of telephone, isn't it? The
Yeah.
version that was told hundreds of years ago is not the version we know today. So
Yeah.
I'm just adding one more coil in the telephone cord of the version of the story. But I had so much fun writing dark, empowering Baba Yaga tales amidst the nonfiction there.
It's really exciting. I'm very excited about the new book, Becoming Baba Yaga. And I feel like you need to have them both, right? So the fiction and then the nonfiction, and they work well together. So, Kris, where can we follow you online? Where can we buy your books? Where can we learn more about you and stalk you? By the way, I did already follow you on Instagram and already sent you a message. So
Yeah, so Instagram is the best way to start. I've already followed you back. So we're all set there. Instagram's my favorite place. This is where I am geeking out about my latest research, whether it is Baba Yaga related, whether it is some other story or author or little known word that I'm utterly fascinated about at any given time, like the word mediocre, the origin of the word mediocre. If you actually break it up, like medi, so halfway, and then ochre is about mountain. So the fact that the word mediocre literally comes from halfway up the mountain, it's like, oh, just keep climbing, right? Anyway, I'm utterly fascinated by this stuff, and I always post that stuff on Instagram. So Instagram, it's just Kris.Spisak on Instagram, Kris.Spisak on Instagram. Most active there, but I'm pretty much everywhere. And on my website, krisspisak.com. And my books are everywhere books are sold.
everywhere books are sold, support your local bookstores, support your
Definitely.
independent bookstores, or buy it directly from Kris because she's awesome and you want to support her because she's amazing.
They're awesome.
And
And bookshop.org is the best play. If you don't have a good
yeah,
indie bookseller, go to bookshop.org and that will support indie booksellers, even if
yes,
you don't have someone down the street from you.
yeah, they're awesome. I get so much stuff from them. Um, so we'll put all of that in the show notes so people will be able to click and link and follow and share and all that jazz. Last question, Kris, and I ask this to everyone that comes on the show. If you could have me as a kitchen witch make you one magical meal, what would it be and why?
Hmm. That is such a beautiful question. Let's see. If we could steal some powers from Baba Yaga and slow down time a little bit, that would be my biggest request because I feel like those of us who are curious and are chasing white rabbits all over the place, there is not enough time in the day sometimes to pursue all of our curiosities amid everything else we have going on in our lives. So I feel like an ability to allow for some mindfulness to slow down and do what we want to do and pursue the passions as well as all of our life necessities. How's that?
So that would be awesome. But the question was,
Oh no.
what would you like me to cook for you?
Gotcha.
A magical meal, a literal meal. So
Oh, I was
my
hearing this as like, what would the meal
yeah, no,
help empower?
I'm a literal kitchen witch. So
Huh.
my witchcraft is about cooking meals, nurturing people, using food to glean spiritual goals. So if I'm hearing you and
Mm.
you're saying what I wish for is more time and more space to enjoy that time, my kitchen witchy brain goes, well, I think you need like a 7 course meal
Mm.
of slow cooked foods and things that are going to be very grounding and earthy, like a potato and leek soup, something with parsnips and meats, like things like that, that are going to help ground you, keep you cozy, keep you warm, and give you time and space to enjoy everything. That's where
I love
my
that.
that's where my brain goes. I don't know if that interpretation is is correct for you.
No, I think that interpretation is quite beautiful. And maybe throw, since you're Italian, maybe throw some gnocchi in there too.
Oh, potato gnocchi, because potatoes are
Exactly.
really grounding. And I
Yes,
feel
they
like
are.
that's the energy of potatoes, is to keep you
Yes.
grounded. So
Oh,
I
I
can,
love that. I
yeah,
never thought about the energy of potatoes in that way. I
yeah.
love
So
that.
I'm a very anxious person, and I tend to live like I'm always,
Mhm.
going. And potatoes are the food, the energy of that ingredient is to help you ground, feel planted, feel rooted in your
Huh,
task and your day. So all these foods have different individual energies that we work with as kitchen witches to help, whether you need protective energy or you need health or wellness. That's a space that I work in. So
that's beautiful.
that's it. When you're talking about this, that's immediately what I felt for you, was you need some of that time and grounding, and we could go sit in a hut in the middle of
Uh,
the woods and make you a big potato soup. you know
I love
it would
that.
be
And I thank
great.
you for the extra explanation there. But I love that so
It's
much.
awesome. You are just wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion for Baba Yaga and storytelling. It's been wonderful getting to know you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really glad that we got to connect here, and I thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Anytime, we'll do it again.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
until next time, everyone, I wish you all the blessings and so much gratitude.